Welcome to the Andrea Giovino Show. I'd like to thank all the subscribers that continue to subscribe. Thank you for leaving comments. And I always like to thank Jesus for giving me this platform and helping me to be the person I am today. We don't like no negativity. You want to leave negative comments, I'm not going to respond to that. So today, Toby TNT is co-hosting with me. We go back and forth, and I wanted to go into the Tommy Karate, Frank Gangi. I knew both those guys. I knew Gangi actually till right before he died, and we'll get into that. Okay. You know, after he got out of witness protection and all, he contacted me. But Tommy Karate
Pitera.
Yeah.
One of the most dangerous and ruthless killers inside the Mafia ever. One of the most feared and horrible hitmen, because he wasn't just a hitman for the Mafia. He was a psychopathic killer.
They say he was kind of like a serial killer. He was involved in like maybe 60 murders.
So I believe he was an individual that liked to kill. I don't think he was just a hired hand. I believe he was an individual that also had some type of sick fantasy with killing, and similar to a serial killer.
Yeah, I met Tommy. He was very young. He was like 22, 23. I was living with Frank Lino at the time. He might have been 23, yeah, 24, something like that. And, at that young age, I didn't see that in him because, like, I think I've shared in other interviews that I've done. He'd come over to the house. I mean, I guess because Frank Lino was his boss, because he was with the Bonanno family. He was just like at times a hang around, and then he went up the ladder as things moved forward. But he was a very respectful young kid. Very respectful, because he'd not just come to the house. We'd see him over on Avenue U, over by the cafe when I'd go there with Frank, and he always, was polite. But then again, a sociopath, they say, that's the characteristics of, looking back now, those are the characteristics of a sociopath. A lot of them are very charismatic, very charming, and you wouldn't know the type of crimes that he was doing. We're talking like, this was a hardcore killer that branched out later on, from being a hang around and doing stuff. And the reason he got the name Tommy Karate, he was very good with his hands. I think you know the background.
So I know the background. So see how you said you met this nice guy that knew how to present himself well, be a polite guy as an individual. I'll give you a little story. When I was a kid, I go with my dad. I'm a little kid at this point. I go with my dad to some guy's house, and they're conversing back and forth. And the guy's cursing, but my father was a street guy. Before I get too far ahead of this, part of Tommy Karate's crew. Okay. This guy, and I'm a little kid right now, what I'm talking about. But this guy and my father, they're talking, they're going back and forth. He's cursing. Like, there's no kid there. I guess the point that I'm making is, like, when you're a little kid, there's certain things that you just remember that click, that stay in the back of your head. And I remember watching this individual, and I think I might have said, "Hey, Dad, he's cursing," or something like that, And, the guy, I remember, had a look in his eyes that was kind of blank or somewhat out there. I don't know how to exactly explain it, but didn't look like a normal individual the way he was acting with a child in the room. When I look back and say, I'm a child, years later, I have a conversation with my father regarding Tommy Karate. Mm-hmm. And, some of the shit that he was doing, and some of the crimes that were being committed, and so on and so forth, and it was some heinous stuff. It was stuff that was, this guy wasn't just a hitman and a killer. I mean, he was putting bodies in bathtubs. He was dismembering body parts. I believe he was also keeping body parts as souvenirs. Mm-hmm. That's the typical sign of a serial killer.
That's exactly right. It's not like organized crime, you shoot them in the back of the head, you shoot them in the front of the head, you kill them with a gun. This was really someone that it seemed like he enjoyed it. And coming up from the ranks, so I think he was brought around originally through Bruno, Anthony and Delgado, brought him around, and then hanging around the Bonanno family, and then became a soldier. And then ultimately he became a captain in the Bonanno family. And
so Bruno, so just for that name Bruno, if you remember in the movie with Johnny Depp,
yes,
and Al Pacino, there's a scene
right
in the basement where the old man,
what was the name of that?
I believe it was Sonny Red and Delgado.
Yells
out, Bruno!
Well, that was his father that yelled out to him in that film, which was, what was the name of the film? I can't think right now.
Now I can't think of the name of the film. I've watched it I don't know how many times.
I have to think about that. But I'm sure the viewers will know because they love mob stuff.
Put it in the comments.
Yeah, put it in the comments. But anyway, getting back to him, there was a difference between him and Frank Gangi because Frank Gangi literally suffered because Frankie called me after he got out of prison. He had actually cooperated. He got stopped for DUI, and he openly said he wanted to talk. When I spoke with Gangi when he got out of prison, because he was incarcerated with my ex-husband, John Fogarty, did time with him, and he friended me. That's how I met, he found me. He friended me on Facebook. Hey, Ann, how you doing? Blah, 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 blah. Remember me from the old days? And yeah, Frankie, I remember you. But Frankie, and then as time went on, I gave him my number and we used to talk on the phone. And he suffered, truly suffered a lot with his conscience. He couldn't live with himself. He said that to me. He says, I couldn't live with myself.
So
but
let me pause you for 1 second, because the audience is going to wonder why. I don't understand. They're going to wonder, why did Frank Gangi call you and why were you talking to him? My mother has tried to help numerous people. So it's not just Frank Gangi. There's numerous people throughout the years that have reached out to my mother for guidance, life coaching on a variety of different issues and different things. Addiction is another one of them where she's coached people and tried to help people. So I just wanted to, the audience understands why this individual was calling you.
And I think because he might have heard a lot about me, Frank Gangi heard a lot about me through being incarcerated with John, and then reached out to me. I was always very kind to him, but I had to put a stop to it because as much as he suffered before he went to prison and tried to cleanse his soul, when he got out, he was living in the basement after the relocation with the government and all of that. And then when he had his ID and all of that changed because he was a government informer in WITSEC, then he went and lived with his son in the basement of his son and went back with the mother of his original wife.
Okay.
And he willowed away with drugs, pills, but not antidepressants, painkillers. And he started doing that, and he would be stoned and he'd be ringing my phone, waking me up 1 in the morning, and then I had to put a stop to it and tell him, Frankie, you can't do this no more. You just can't call me. I said, because you're waking me up in the middle of the night. You know what time it is? It's 2:00 in the morning. Oh, don't you have time to talk? Not now. I said, because now you're going to be sleeping all day while I'm up. So the point I'm getting at is Frank Gangi had more of a conscience than Tommy Pitera. He suffered before he got caught up with all of this to try to be in the street life with these gangsters and thinking he was, the hoo-hoo days, but then what happened, it all caught up with him and he couldn't live with himself. But Gangi didn't have that.
So
that's the difference.
Here's my opinion on Gangi. Gangi was a lifetime criminal.
Yeah.
He ended up with taking orders from a serial killer, basically.
Yeah.
You have a guy that wasn't just a mafia hitman. He was a guy that I believe liked to kill and would kill without remorse. And, I think at some point where it probably got Gangi was he had to set up his girlfriend and murder a woman that he was seeing and dating.
Yeah.
Gangi was so brainwashed and probably so scared.
Your father was friends with them when we were younger. He was friends with that woman. I can't think of her name, but she had a bunch of sisters.
You talking about the woman that got killed?
Yeah, she had a bunch
Phyllis
of...
Birdie?
Birdie. Yeah, Phyllis
Okay.
Birdie had a bunch of sisters, yeah.
Okay.
And they were all into heavy drugs and stuff like that. They were doing heroin and stuff. Like, I never went around that.
Okay.
But they used to stay at this bowling alley in Brooklyn on 86th Street. And your father knew them all,
Yeah.
Phyllis Birdie and her sisters. And, yeah, I mean, I don't even know what that murder was about. I have no idea.
I can tell you, it is public knowledge as well. So the murder was about, people were warned apparently on the streets by Tommy Karate not to give, I forget if it was his wife or his girlfriend, drugs. Okay.
Okay.
And she ended up getting high with Phyllis Birdie, and she ends up overdosing with her friend,
Yeah,
Phyllis
because
Birdie.
Phyllis Birdie and all of them were very heavily into drugs, even at a very young age.
So now, Tommy Karate tells Gangi to get Phyllis Birdie
Oh, set
to
her up.
come there, to the apartment. Phyllis
Wow.
Birdie comes to the apartment. So this is where Gangi probably can't live with him. He's done murders before.
He couldn't live
he's
with
killed
himself.
people. He's been on the streets his whole life.
No, he could.
But now he's setting up his girlfriend or ex-girlfriend, whatever she was.
He couldn't live with himself. He was completely a waste, living in a basement, living like not doing anything. That
He probably regrets that he didn't take a bullet and put it in Tommy Karate's head himself. That's probably why he can't live with himself.
I think that because he died, but I think that knowing him and talking to him, when they're on the streets and they have a gun and all of that, they're tough guys. But when you're incarcerated and you don't have a weapon with you and you're not that good with your hands, you're not such a tough guy, you know, because my ex-husband said that. Because when John found out that he was even calling me, and I wasn't even with John, we were divorced.
Yeah.
He said, I feel like breaking his effing head because who is he calling my ex-wife? Like, where do you come off calling my ex-wife?
Yeah.
This guy's got no respect.
Yeah.
So I cut Frank Gangi off. I had to block him. I blocked him on Facebook. I blocked him on my phone, everything, because he was totally not with it. Like, he was just withering away with drugs and getting stoned and, you know, as smoking it up. And, you know, couldn't live with himself.
So another thing about Gangi, I know we're going back and forth between Tommy Karate and Frank Gangi. Another thing about, you know, Gangi, he actually tried to put my father away.
Ratting?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when I was probably about 20 years old, I was living in New York at my grandmother's house at the time. I get a call from one of my uncles. I'm not going to mention names. In prison, and my uncle says to me,
Oh, I remember this. Yeah.
I want you to give word to your father.
Yeah, he was.
This guy is trying to put your father away on a murder charge.
Okay.
So I remember going into the yard to have a conversation with my father. And, you know, I tell my father, listen, you know, guy Frank Gangi, you know, he's trying to cooperate. He is cooperating with the government. He's apparently telling them that, you know, you were involved in a murder and supposedly, you know, this, that, and the other thing happened. And, you know, I remember the look on my father's face. He looked pissed. And he looked at me and he goes, I didn't kill nobody. So
Yeah, well,
something like that.
Yeah,
you know, it was a long time ago. But the long story short is, you know, to have this conversation with my father as a kid. Obviously, we know that's not a normal conversation that a father and son are having together. That this guy's looking to cooperate against you on a murder, this, that, and the other. We know that
not.
now.
No, we
Reality
know
of
that
it is
now.
We grow up in and
From the
around. We grow up in and around these
Crime.
people and this criminal element. And again, I always like to convey that is not who we are today. That is not what we're about, not what we want to associate with. always wish everybody the best. But just to give a perspective of these guys, this Gangi, my father, I believe, because he was involved with this crew, okay, and these guys, I believe he was another guy that had a hard time with certain things in life, because he was getting ready to tell me a story about what went on, and them chopping up bodies and a thing. And my father was a hardcore street guy. Anybody that ever talks about my father to me or whatever, they convey that.
Oh no, yeah, and he was very liked.
He was getting ready to tell me, and he was very liked. He was getting ready to tell me something, and I remember he looked at me, and he went like this. He looked so disgusted, and I remember he looked at me with a disgusted face, and he said, "Nah, forget it. He didn't want to tell me whatever he was going to tell me.
With karate.
About about the murders and what he was doing and how he was killing people. This was when my dad got older. He was out of New York at this time. He was in Florida. My dad has since passed away, so that's why we're having these conversations.
Yes.
God bless him. God rest his soul. He did get away from the gangster life. In his later years, he did serve multiple prison sentences.
He never cooperated.
He wasn't a rat.
He wasn't into that.
Yeah.
So, and back then, I mean, even it was unheard of. Like, it just didn't. People just didn't do that.
But the crimes that were being committed, they were horrendous. It wasn't they were just killing somebody. So in the Mafia, as you know, people get killed because they're involved. It's
always over money. It's usually over money, greed, territory,
or respect.
Respect.
You step out of line. You step out of line in a certain way, you could get killed for it.
Yeah. Not now. Now it's run like forget it.
Well, now I've said this before. We now live in a day and age where there's satellites, there's Ring doorbells.
Oh, there's everything. It's very hard to go commit crimes today. And
they'll catch you walking down the street on somebody else's camera. There's people have cameras on their houses, ring doorbells. Every phone has a video on it. I mean, we're in a different world and a different time, so you don't see the murders that you used to see inside the Mafia. You don't see that happen anymore. But back in those days, I mean, this was a common occurrence, unfortunately.